B. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the Frostfang forest was silent beneath a silver moon. The next, thunder shattered the night. Rain crashed through the ancient trees, turning the narrow paths into rivers of mud. Lightning tore across the black sky, revealing twisted branches that looked like reaching hands. And through that darkness, Lyra was running. Her breath came in sharp, frightened gasps. Her cloak was torn, her boots were soaked, branches scratched her arms as she pushed deeper into the forest. But she wasn't running from the storm. She was running from the 3 wolves behind her. 3 enormous black wolves. They were bigger than any ordinary wolves Lyra had ever seen. Their eyes reflected the lightning as they moved between the trees. Silent and impossibly fast. Lyra glanced over her shoulder. They're still following me. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't understand them. She didn't understand why they had come to her cabin. And she certainly didn't understand why they had suddenly started dragging her toward the forbidden forest. Lyra stumbled. Her foot caught a root. She fell hard against the wet ground. Pain shot through her ankle. She tried to crawl. Backward, one of the wolves stepped into the clearing. Lyra froze. It was the largest of the 3. Its black fur was soaked by the rain, and its massive chest rose and fell slowly. Lyra pressed herself against a tree. Please. Her voice trembled. I don't have anything for you. The wolf stared at her. It didn't growl. It didn't bare its teeth. Instead, it slowly walked closer. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, but the attack never came. Something tugged at her cloak. Her eyes opened. The wolf had caught the edge of the torn fabric between its teeth. It pulled once, then released it. Lyra stared at it in confusion. What are you doing? The wolf turned around. It took several steps toward the darkness. Then, it looked back. Lyra didn't move. The wolf returned. It grabbed her cloak again. This time it pulled harder. Stop! Lyra tried to free herself, but the wolf wouldn't let go. Then the second wolf appeared. It stepped directly between Lyra and the path leading back home. Lyra looked from one wolf to the other. You want me to go that way? The second wolf didn't move. Behind them, the third wolf stood beneath the trees. Its head was raised. It was listening. Then a howl echoed through the forest. It wasn't the howl of these 3 wolves. It was distant. Weak. Terrified. Lyra. Single quotes. His blood turned cold. She slowly lifted her head. What was that? The 3 wolves immediately turned toward the sound. Every muscle in their bodies tightened. Then all 3 began moving deeper into the forest. Lyra remained. Where she was, she knew that part of the forest. Everyone did. The forbidden woods, no member of the Frostfang Pack was allowed to enter. Old stories claimed that wolves disappeared there. Some said ancient spirits guarded the trees. Others whispered that people who entered never returned. Lyra swallowed. I can't go there. She took a step backward. The wolves stopped. They looked back at her. The largest one returned. It stood directly in front of her, not threatening her, waiting. Lyra shook her head. The wolf lowered its head. For some strange reason, Lyra felt something inside her chest tighten. Those eyes weren't cruel. They were desperate, as if they were asking her for help. She looked toward the dark forest, then back at the wolves. What are you trying to show me? The 3 wolves stared at her. For several seconds. Nothing happened. Then they howled together. The sound rolled across the mountains. Lyra felt the hairs rise on her arms. Something moved between the trees. A tiny shadow. She narrowed her eyes. Who's there? Nothing answered. She took one cautious step forward, then another. The wolves disappeared into the darkness. Lyra followed. The rain became heavier. Branches struck her face. Her breathing grew faster. She nearly turned around. Then she heard it. A sound so small she almost believed it was the wind, a child's cry. Lyra stopped. Her entire body went still. No. Another cry came from deeper inside the forest. This time she knew it was a child. Someone was crying. Someone was afraid. Lyra immediately began moving again. She pushed through the branches. Hello. No answer. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. She heard a faint whimper, then silence. Lyra looked around. The 3 wolves were standing several yards ahead. They were staring at something behind a massive ancient tree. Lyra slowly approached. Her heart pounded. She pushed aside a curtain of wet branches, and then she saw a tiny hand disappear behind the tree. Lyra's breath caught. There's someone here. The largest wolf looked at her. For the first time, Lyra understood. They hadn't chased her into the forest. They had brought her here. They had been trying to show her someone, a secret. But before she could take another step, thunder exploded overhead. Lyra flinched, and suddenly, the scene in front of her seemed to disappear beneath the darkness. Hours earlier, Lyra had been standing alone in the center of the Frostfang Pack's great hall. Hundreds of wolves surrounded her. Every face was watching. Tefri whisper was cutting deeper than a blade, and standing before her was the one man she had secretly loved for years. Alpha. Kael. Cold. Powerful. Untouchable. His eyes had met hers only once. Then he had spoken the words that destroyed her life. I reject you as my mate. The hall had erupted in whispers. Some people laughed, others looked away. Lyra remembered standing there, forcing herself not to cry. She remembered Kael's expression. There had been no hesitation, no regret, nothing. So Lyra had lowered her head and walked away. She didn't know then that her rejection was only the beginning. She didn't know that someone had deliberately pushed her away from the pack. She didn't know that 3 ancient wolves would soon choose her, and she certainly didn't know that deep inside the forbidden forest, a frightened child was waiting for the one person brave enough to find him, a child whose existence could change the fate of the entire Frostfang kingdom. Back in the forest, Lyra slowly approached the tree. She whispered, "Who are you?" A small voice answered from the darkness. "Please." Lyra stopped breathing. "Don't let them find me." Her eyes widened. "Who?" The child began to cry. "The Alpha." Lyra's heart dropped, and behind her, the 3 black wolves suddenly growled toward the darkness. They weren't protecting Lyra from the child, they were protecting the child from someone else. Lyra turned toward the sound. And somewhere beyond the trees, another pair of eyes was watching. The rejected Omega had just stepped into a secret that could bring an entire kingdom to its knees. The words stayed with Lyra long after the storm disappeared. "Don't let them find me." She had heard the child's voice. She had seen the tiny hand disappear behind the ancient tree. And yet, when she reached for him, he was gone. The 3 black wolves had vanished too. Only Rain remained. Lyra stood alone beneath the ancient branches, staring into the darkness. Who was that child? Why was he hiding? And why had he mentioned Alpha Kael? She wanted answers. But before she could search any farther, another sound echoed through the forest, a distant horn. The pack patrol. Lyra's heart tightened. If they found her inside the forbidden forest, she would be punished. Maybe worse. She quickly turned back toward her cabin, but every few steps, she looked over her shoulder. The wolves were nowhere to be seen. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching her, protecting her. Or perhaps waiting for her. By the time Lyra reached her cabin, dawn was beginning to break. She closed the wooden door behind her and leaned against it. Her entire body was exhausted. She should have been thinking about the strange child. Instead, an older memory returned, a memory she had spent years trying to bury. The day Alpha Kael rejected her. 3 years earlier, the Frostfang Pack's great hall had been filled with music. Hundreds of wolves had gathered for the annual mate ceremony. For an Omega like Lyra, it was supposed to be the greatest night of her life. She had spent hours preparing. Her dress was simple. Her hair was braided with small white flowers, and beneath all the nervousness in her heart was one impossible hope: be Alpha Kael. For years, Lyra had admired him from a distance. He was strong, disciplined, respected by every warrior. In the territory, she had never believed she was worthy of him. But when the mating ceremony began, something inside her had whispered that destiny might finally see her. Then, Kael stepped forward. His eyes met hers. For one heartbeat, Lyra thought the world had stopped. Then he spoke. "I reject you as my mate." Silence, complete silence. Lyra remembered the way the words echoed through the hall. She remembered someone laughing. Then, Another? Someone whispered that the Alpha had been cursed with an Omega who had no strength. Lyra's cheeks burned. She looked at Kael. She wanted him to explain. She wanted him to say there had been a mistake. He said nothing. So Lyra bowed her head. She swallowed every tear and whispered, "I understand." Then she walked away. She never looked back. From that day forward, Lyra became almost invisible. She stopped attending celebrations, stopped eating in the main hall, stopped speaking. Unless someone spoke to her first. Eventually, the elders allowed her to live in a small cabin near the edge of the territory. It was supposed to be punishment. For Lyra, it became freedom. No mocking voices, no cruel whispers, no cruel whispers, no one reminding her that she was unwanted. She learned how to survive alone. Every morning, she gathered herbs. Every afternoon, she collected firewood, and whenever injured animals appeared near her cabin, she cared for them. She had very little, but she still gave away what she could. One cold morning, Lyra was walking through the forest when she heard a strange sound, a faint whimper. She stopped. There it was again. She followed the sound until she reached a pile of fallen branches. Something was moving beneath them. Lyra dropped her basket. Oh, sweetheart! A tiny black wolf pup was trapped underneath the wood. One of its legs was pinned. The pup tried to bite her hand when she reached toward it. Lyra didn't pull away. "It's okay." She slowly moved the branches aside. The pup growled. "I know you're scared." Another branch fell. Lyra winced as it struck her shoulder. Still, she continued. Finally, she freed the pup. It immediately tried to run, but its injured leg collapsed. Lyra caught it. "Easy." The little wolf trembled in her arms. Lyra carried it back to her cabin. She cleaned its wound, wrapped its leg, and gave it the last piece of dried meat she had saved for herself. The pup ate slowly. Then it lifted its head. For a moment, Lyra smiled. "You're a brave little thing." The pup stared at her. Almost as if it understood. That night, Lyra placed the wolf beside the fireplace. When she woke the next morning, it was gone. She searched outside. Nothing. No paw prints, no broken branches. Nothing. Lyra sighed. "Maybe you found your way home." She turned toward her cabin, then stopped. 3 enormous black wolves were standing outside her door. Lyra froze. They were unlike any wolves she had ever seen. Massive, powerful. Perfectly still. The largest had a thin silver scar running across its muzzle. The second had unusually bright eyes. The third was smaller, but its gaze seemed almost intelligent. Lyra slowly reached for the knife hanging beside her door. The wolves didn't move. She waited. 1 second, 2. 3. Then Lyra lowered the knife. "You're not here to attack me, are you?" The wolves stared. She carefully opened the door. The largest wolf took 1 step forward. Lyra stepped backward. The wolf stopped. Its gaze moved toward a bowl of food beside the cabin. Lyra understood. "Oh," she laughed nervously. "You're hungry." She took some leftover meat and placed it on the ground. The wolves looked at the food, but none of them moved. Lyra frowned. "What?" The largest wolf looked at her, then toward the forest, then back at her. Lyra blinked. "You don't want the food." The wolf turned away. The other 2 followed. They walked several steps toward the trees, then stopped. All 3 looked back. Lyra felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was almost as though they were waiting for her. "You want me to follow you?" The wolves remained still. Lyra shook her head. "No, absolutely not." She picked up her basket. "I have work to do." The wolves didn't leave. They remained outside her cabin all day. When Lyra gathered herbs, they watched. When she carried firewood, they followed. When she returned home, they sat outside her door. By sunset, Lyra had stopped being afraid. She began giving them names. The largest became Shadow. The one with bright eyes became Storm, and the smallest became Ash. Shadow. The largest wolf lifted its head. Lyra smiled. "I think you like that." Storm's ears moved. Ash stepped closer. For several days, the strange routine continued. The wolves appeared every morning. They never harmed Lyra. Sometimes they disappeared for hours, but they always returned. And strangely, whenever Lyra walked through dangerous parts of the forest, they stayed close. One afternoon, she slipped near a rocky slope. Before she could fall, Shadow grabbed the back of her cloak and pulled her away. Lyra stared at him. "You just saved me?" Shadow released the fabric. Then he looked away as if nothing had happened. Lyra laughed softly. "Thank you." She didn't know that someone else had witnessed the entire thing. High on a ridge overlooking the clearing stood Alpha Kael. He had returned from the northern border that morning. He had expected to find the forest quiet. Instead, he had seen something impossible. 3 wolves believed to have vanished decades ago, protecting a rejected Omega. Kael narrowed his eyes. He knew the old legends. Everyone in the royal family did. The 3 guardians, ancient wolves said to have protected the royal bloodline for generations. According to the old records, they had disappeared after the death of Kael's younger brother. Kael had always believed the stories were myths, but now they were standing beside Lyra. Kael watched as Lyra gently touched Ash's injured paw. The wolf allowed her to do it. Kael's expression hardened. Why her? What did those wolves see in an Omega the entire pack considered worthless? He turned away, but before leaving, he looked back one final time. Lyra was smiling, a smile Kael realized he had never seen during the years. She had lived inside the pack. For some reason, that thought disturbed him. Meanwhile, Lyra had no idea the Alpha was watching. She was focused on Ash. There was blood on his paw. "Oh no," she knelt. "Come here." Ash hesitated, then slowly placed his paw in her hand. Lyra cleaned the wound. The wolf didn't resist. When she finished, she whispered, "There." Ash looked into her eyes. For one strange moment, Lyra felt something. Not fear, not danger, a warmth, a connection she couldn't explain. She looked toward the other 2 wolves. All 3 were watching her. Then Shadow suddenly stood. He walked toward a narrow path between the trees. Storm followed. Ash turned to Lyra. She frowned. "You're leaving." The wolves stopped. Lyra stood. They continued walking. She followed them for several minutes, but suddenly, they reached a wall of ancient trees. The forest beyond was darker, older, forbidden. The wolves stepped no farther. They turned around. Lyra looked past them. "What is in there?" No answer. She took one step forward. The wolves blocked her. Lyra stepped left. Shadow moved left. She stepped right. Storm moved right. Lyra crossed her arms. "You're kidding." Ash sat down. Lyra sighed. "You brought me all the way here just to stop me." The 3 wolves stared at her. Then all 3 turned toward the darkness. A cold wind moved through the trees. Lyra heard something, a faint rustling. She looked carefully. For just a moment, she saw a tiny hand between the branches. Then it disappeared. Lyra's heart stopped. "Wait." She stepped forward. The wolves howled. The sound echoed through the forest. Lyra whispered, "Who is in there?" No answer, only silence. She looked at the 3 wolves, and for the first time she understood something terrifying. They weren't asking her to feed them. They weren't asking her to protect them. They were trying to make her discover someone hidden. Someone who had been waiting in the darkness. And whoever that person was, the wolves had chosen Lyra as the only human they trusted enough to find them. Lyra didn't know it yet, but the moment she stepped into that forbidden forest, her old life would end, and the truth about why Alpha Kael rejected her would finally begin to surface. The next morning, Lyra woke before sunrise. For several seconds, she simply stared at the wooden ceiling of her small cabin. The storm was gone, but she could still hear the child's frightened voice in her mind. "Please, don't let him find me." Lyra sat up. Who was that child? Why was he hiding in the forbidden forest? Why had 3 enormous black wolves led her there? She had spent most of the night trying to convince herself that exhaustion had caused her to imagine it. But when she opened the cabin door, her heart stopped. The 3 wolves were waiting outside. Shadow was lying near the steps. Storm stood beside the trees, and Skash was watching the cabin door as if he had been waiting for Lyra to wake. Lyra folded her arms. "You 3 really don't give up, do you?" Ash stood. He walked toward her. Lyra smiled faintly. "You want breakfast?" Ash looked at her. Then he turned toward the forest. Lyra sighed. I knew it. She brought out a bowl of meat. This time, the wolves didn't even look at it. Instead, Shadow walked toward the narrow path. Lyra followed. They stopped at the same place as yesterday, the forbidden forest. Lyra stared into the darkness. There's someone in there. Shadow remained still. Lyra took one step forward. The wolf blocked her. Why won't you let me pass? Shadow lowered his head. For a moment, Lyra thought she understood. Whatever was beyond those trees was dangers. Maybe the wolves weren't stopping her because they didn't trust her. Maybe they were protecting her. Lyra reached out and gently touched Shadow's head. Then show me another way. The wolf raised his eyes. Something changed in his expression. He turned away, then began walking along the edge of the forbidden woods. Lyra followed. They moved deeper into the forest. The trees became thicker. The morning sunlight barely reached the ground. After several minutes, suddenly stopped. His ears lifted. Lyra looked around. What is it? A low growl came from his throat. Then Shadow stepped forward. The wild boar burst from the bushes. Lyra screamed. The animal charged. Before she could move, Storm jumped between them. The wolf snarled. The boar stopped. For several tense seconds, the two animals stared at each other. Then the boar turned and disappeared into the forest. Lyra stood frozen. Storm returned to her. She looked down at him. You protected me. Storm simply sat. Lyra crouched and touched his fur. Thank you. She, Sunting, realized something. That wolves weren't just intelligent. They were guarding her. But why? Question followed her for the rest of the day. By evening, Lyra had returned to her cabin. She was preparing a small meal when she heard footsteps outside. She opened the door. No wolves, instead. 2 pack warriors stood there. Lyra, she immediately became tense. Yes, Mo. You are ordered to report to the main settlement tomorrow morning. Lyra's stomach tightened. Why? Thoya's expression remained cold. Luna Celine has requested your presence. Lyra lowered her eyes. Of course, she knew Celine didn't summon Amigas without a reason. I'll come. The warriors left. Lyra closed the door. Outside, Shadow growled softly. Lyra looked toward him. I know, she sighed. Something is wrong. The following morning, Lyra prepared herself for the journey. Before leaving, she looked toward the forest. The 3 wolves were there. Waiting. Lyra pointed at them. Stay, Tia. Shadow tilted his head. I mean it. The wolves didn't move. Lyra began walking. After several minutes, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. The 3 wolves were following. You didn't listen. Storm looked completely slow, unconcerned. Lyra shook her head. Fine. The wolves followed her all the way to the settlement. People immediately notice. Whispers spread through the streets. Those are the black wolves. Why are they following her? Where did they come from? Lyra ignored them, but one person did. Alpha Kael stood on the balcony of the main hall. His eyes were fixed on the wolves, then on Lyra. He had seen them before. He had spent the previous night searching through old records. The ancient texts describe 3 wolves who appeared only when the royal bloodline was threatened. But according to the records, they had not been seen for 20 years. Kael's jaw tightened. Something was happening, something he didn't understand, and somehow Lyra was at the center of it. Inside the great hall, Luna Celine was waiting. She was elegant, composed, and perfectly dressed. Her smile looked pleasant. Her eyes were not. Lyra, B.O.D. Luna Celine studied her. Then she glanced toward the open doors. The 3 black wolves were sitting outside. Selena's expression changed for the briefest moment. Fear. Then it disappeared. You've been spending time with those animals. They came to me. Celine's voice became colder. Animals don't choose people. Lyra said nothing. Celine approached. You have always had a talent for attracting trouble. Lyra lowered her eyes. I don't want trouble. Celine smiled. Perhaps trouble wants you. Before Lyra could answer. The doors opened. Kael entered. The entire room became silent. Lyra looked at him. It had been years since they had stood this close. She immediately looked away. Kael noticed for some reason that bothered him. Celine stepped toward him. Alpha, I was just explaining the situation. Kael's eyes moved to Lyra. What situation? Celine hesitated. The wolves. Kael looked outside. Shadow was staring directly at him. Kael's expression hardened. Where did they come from? Lyra answered honestly. I don't know. How long have they been with you? Few days. And why? I don't know. Kael studied her. For years, she had believed Lyra was timid, weak, easily frightened, but she was standing before him now without trembling. Something about her had changed. Have they taken you into the forbidden forest? Lyra hesitated. That was enough. Kael's expression became sharp. You went there. Yes, you know it is forbidden. Yes, why? Lyra looked toward the door. The wolves were still there. They wanted me to follow them. Kael stared at her. Lyra nodded. They keep leading me to the same place. Where? The old forest. Celine suddenly interrupted. Perhaps choose. Trying to create a story. Lyra looked at her. I don't need to create anything. Celine smiled. Of course not. Kael's eyes remained on Lyra. Did you see anything? Lyra remembered the tiny hand. The frightened voice. She swallowed. I heard a child. Silence. Kael's face changed. A child. Yes. Did you see him? Not. Clearly, Selena's fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve. Lyra noticed it was only for a second, but she saw it. Fear. Real fear. Why would Selene be afraid of a child in the forest? Before Lyra could ask, a sudden howl echoed outside. The three wolves stood simultaneously. Every person in the hall turned. Shadow looked directly at Lyra. Then, he began, walking toward the forest storm. Followed. Ash stopped beside Lyra. He looked at her. Waiting. Kael stepped toward. The doors. Don't follow them. Lyra stopped. She looked at him. Why? Because I said so. The old Kael. The alpha who expected obedience. Lyra's expression hardened. With respect, Alpha, you don't get to decide where I go anymore. The room went silent. Kael stared at her. Nobody spoke to him like that, not even his warriors. Lyra walked outside. The three wolves immediately followed. Kael watched her disappear. Celine came to stand beside him. You see? Kael didn't answer. She has always been trouble. Kael's eyes remained on the forest. No, Celine looked at him. Kael's voice was quiet. She has always been underestimated. Selena's face tightened. Meanwhile, Lyra followed the wolves beyond the settlement. They moved faster than before. Lyra struggled to keep up. Slow down. They didn't. The path became darker. The forest swallowed the sound of the pack behind them. Then, Shadow stopped. Lyra nearly walked into him. What is it? Thorf looked toward a large stone formation. Lyra stepped closer. There were markings carved into the stones, ancient symbols. She touched one. A strange warmth moved through her hand. She pulled away. What was that? Storm approached. He placed his paw against the same symbol. Nothing happened. Lyra touched it again. The symbol glowed faintly. Her eyes widened. The wolves stared at her. They knew. Whatever this place was, it's recognizer. Then a sound came from behind the rocks. A quiet sob. Lyra turned. Hello. No answer. She moved closer. Another sob. This time the child whispered, Are you one of them? Lyra shook her head. No. Are you here to take me back? No. A small face appeared between the rocks. A boy. Maybe 6 or 7 years old. His cheeks were dirty, his hair was tangled, his clothes were torn, and there was a deep scar across his shoulder. Lyra slowly knelt. My name is Lyra. The boy stared at her. I won't hurt you. He looked at the 3 wolves. They were sitting behind her. The boy seemed to trust them. Then he looked back at Lyra. Why did I bring you? Lyra whispered. I don't know. The boy's eyes filled with tears. They said you would come. Lyra's heart stopped. Who said that? The boy looked toward the darkness. The wolves. Lyra stared at the three guardians. Then, boy whispered the words that would change everything. Please don't tell Alpha Kael I'm alive. Lyra's blood ran cold. She looked toward the pack settlement. Then, back at the frightened child, and suddenly, the mystery of the three wolves became much more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Because they hadn't chosen Lyra by accident. They had chosen her because someone had been waiting for her, and that someone knew exactly who Alpha Kael was. The words echoed inside Lyra's mind. Please don't tell Alpha Kael I'm alive. She stared at the frightened boy hidden behind the ancient stones. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. There were too many questions. Who was he? Who had hidden him here? Why did he fear Kael? And most importantly, why had the three mysterious wolves brought Lyra to him? Lyra slowly crouched lower. What is your name? The boy hesitated. He looked toward Shadow. The enormous black wolf remained completely still. Finally, the child whispered, Rowan, Rowan. He nodded. Lyra softened her voice. I'm not going to tell anyone you're here. Rowan's eyes widened. You promise? I promise. The boy slowly stepped from behind the stone. Lyra noticed how thin he was. His clothes were old and torn. There were bruises along his arms, and the scar across his shoulder looked much older than the other injuries. When did you last eat? Rowan lowered his head. I don't remember. Lyra's heart broke. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small piece of bread. Rowan stared at it. You can have it. He took it carefully. Then he ate as if he had not seen food in days. Lyra looked at the wolves. Shadow was watching the forest. Storm was watching. Rowan Ash was watching Lyra. They weren't behaving like ordinary animals. They were guarding the boy, protecting him. Lyra knew she couldn't leave him alone. But before she could say anything else, a distant horn sounded. The pack patrol. Lyra immediately stood. We have to go. Rowan panicked. No, he grabbed her hand. They'll find me. Who? The people who come at night. Lyra's stomach tightened. What people? Rowan shook his head. I don't know their names. Then how do you know they want you? They always say the same thing. What? Rowan whispered. The Alpha must never know. Lyra looked toward the distant mountains. Something was terribly wrong. She had to get Rowan somewhere safe. But first, she needed to return to her cabin. Come with me. Rowan shook his head. No. Why? They'll see. Lyra looked at the three wolves. Shadow walked toward Rowan, too. The boy placed his small hand against the wolf's head. Lyra suddenly understood. The wolves knew a hidden path. They had been protecting Rowan for a long time. Then show me. Shadow turned. The wolves led them through a narrow passage between the rocks. Lyra followed Rowan. They eventually reached a small cave hidden beneath thick roots. Inside was an old blanket, a wooden cup, several empty containers. Someone had been living there for years. Lyra's heart tightened. Rowan, how long have you been here? The boy looked down. A long time. Who took care of you? The wolves. Lyra stared at them. She didn't know whether to believe him. But the evidence was right in front of her. These creatures had protected a helpless child for years. She turned toward Rowan. You can't stay here forever. The boy's eyes filled with fear. If I leave, they'll kill me. Lyra knelt. I won't let anyone hurt you. You can't fight them. Maybe not. She smiled gently, but I can still try. Rowan looked at her for a long time. Then, he nodded. That evening, Lyra secretly brought him food and medicine. She hid the supplies beneath a loose wooden floorboard in her cabin. For the first time in years, Lyra felt she had something worth protecting. But she didn't know that someone had already noticed her movements. Luna. Selena stood in the shadows of the pack settlement. A guard whispered beside her. She entered the forbidden forest. Selena's face remained calm. Did she see anything? We don't know. Selena's eyes narrowed. Then find out. The guard bowed. Nep, she did. Selena's voice became colder. then make sure she never speaks about it. The next morning, Lyra was summoned to the main hall. She knew immediately that something was wrong the moment she entered. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Selene stood beside the council table. Several healers were present, and on the table lay several bottles of medicine. Lyra stopped. Selene pointed toward them. Do you recognize these? Lyra frowned. Yes, they belong to the healing house. Yes, Selena's eyes hardened, and they were found in your cabin. The room erupted in whispers. Lyra's heart dropped. What? A guard stepped forward and placed the bottles on the table. Lyra stared at them. She had never seen them before. Didn't take those. Selene smiled. Of course you didn't. The sarcasm was obvious. Lyra looked around the room. Nobody believed her. She turned toward the council. Someone put them there. A healer shook her head. Why would anyone frame you? Lyra couldn't answer, because she didn't know. Selene stepped closer. You've always resented the pack. That isn't true. You were rejected by the Alpha. Lyra flinched. The room became quieter. Selene continued. You left the settlement bitter and angry. Left because I was humiliated. And now you steal from the healing house. No. Selene looked toward the guards. Search her cabin again. Lyra's eyes widened. You already searched it. Search it properly. The guards left. Minutes later, they returned. One of them held a small leather pouch. Inside were several rare healing herbs, the same herbs that had disappeared from the healing house weeks earlier. Lyra stared at them. I've never seen those. Selene turned toward the council. There's your proof. The whispers grew louder. She's guilty. She should be exiled. I always knew she was trouble. Lyra's chest tightened. She looked toward the entrance. Then the doors opened. Alpha Kael entered. The entire hall fell silent. Lyra's heart immediately began beating faster. She hadn't spoken to him privately in years. Kael looked at the council. What happened? Selene stepped forward. Your Alpha, Lyra, has been stealing medicine. Kael looked at Lyra. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I didn't. Kael's expression remained unreadable. Where is the evidence? Selene pointed toward the table. It was found in her cabin. Kael walked toward the evidence. He examined the bottles. Then the herbs. His eyes narrowed. Who searched the cabin? 2 guards stepped forward. Adets. Was anyone else there? No. Kael looked at Lyra. Did you touch these? No. Did you know they were missing? No. Selene immediately interrupted. She is lying. Kael turned toward her. I didn't ask you. The room became silent. Selena's expression tightened. Kael returned his attention to Lyra. Why were you in the Forbidden Forest? Lyra froze. How did he know? Selene watched her carefully. Kael stepped closer. Answer me. Lyra swallowed. Went there because the wolves led me. Selene laughed. The wolves? Lyra nodded. They've been following me. Kael's eyes sharpened. Why, I don't know. Did you find anyone? Lyra hesitated. Rowan's face appeared in her mind, his frightened eyes, his trembling voice. Please don't tell Alpha Kael I'm alive. No, she lied. Kael studied her face. He seemed to know she wasn't telling the whole truth. But before he could ask another question, a sudden sound came from outside. A growl. Then another. The entire hall turned toward the doors. 3 enormous black wolves stood outside. Shadow, Storm. Ash. They were staring directly at Lyra. Nobody moved. One of the guards whispered, Those aren't ordinary wolves. Kael stepped toward the entrance. Shadow's eyes met his. The wolf growled. Kael stopped. He recognized that look. Recognition. The same look he had seen in the old royal records. His heart began pounding. The 3 guardians. Impossible. They were supposed to be gone, but they were here. Nay had chosen Lyra. Shadow suddenly turned toward the forest. Storm followed. Ash remained behind for 1 second longer. He looked directly at Lyra. Then he turned. Lyra understood. They were calling her again. Selene noticed her face went pale. Stop her. 2 guards grabbed Lyra's arms. She struggled. Let me go. Kael's voice thundered across the hall. Release her. The guards immediately stopped. Lyra looked at him. For the first time since her rejection, Kael was standing between her and the people trying to hurt her, but Selene stepped forward. Alpha, you cannot let her leave. Kael's eyes hardened. Why? Selene hesitated, because she knew. She knew exactly where those wolves were leading Lyra, and she knew what Lyra might discover. Kael looked at her suspiciously. Why are you afraid of the forest? Selene said nothing. Lyra saw it, that tiny flicker of fear, and suddenly, she knew Selene was hiding something. Lyra pulled her arms free. She looked at Kael. I didn't steal the medicine. Kael didn't answer. Lyra looked at the wolves, then back at him. And I'm going to find out who did. She walked toward the doors. Nobody stopped her. Outside, the wolves began moving. Lyra followed behind her. Kael watched. Selene stood completely still. Her expression had changed. The calm Luna was gone. Something darker had appeared in her eyes. She turned toward one of her guards. Follow her. The guard nodded. Selene whispered, and this time, don't let the Omega come back. Deep inside the forest, Lyra followed the three wolves beneath the dark trees. She didn't know that someone was following her. She didn't know that Rowan was waiting, and she didn't know that the truth she was about to uncover would destroy the life of the woman who had spent years making sure. Lyra remained powerless. The rejected Omega had finally become dangerous. North, because she had gained strength, but because she had started asking questions. The forest swallowed Lyra almost immediately. Behind her, the lights of the Frostfang settlement disappeared between the trees. Ahead, opponents. Only darkness remained. The three black wolves moved silently through the ancient forest. Shadow led the way. Storm stayed several steps behind him. Ash remained closest to Lyra, repeatedly looking back as if checking whether someone was following them. Lyra noticed. You think we're being followed? Ash stopped. His ears lifted. Lyra held her breath. Nothing. Only the wind. She listened again. There, a branch snapped somewhere behind them. Lyra turned. Who's there? No answer. She took a step backward. Ash immediately moved in front of her. A low growl escaped his throat. Lyra understood. Someone was following them. She whispered, then, we need to move. The wolves suddenly accelerated. Lyra hurried after them. Branches scratched her arms. The ground became uneven. The deeper they went, the colder the forest became. Soon, sticky. Even the moonlight disappeared beneath the thick canopy. Lyra looked around, nervously. I've never been this far. Shadow stopped. He turned toward her dot, then he walked toward a narrow opening between two enormous trees. Lyra followed. The passage led downward. The ground became slippery. She grabbed a branch for balance. Then the earth beneath her foot suddenly collapsed. Lyra fell forward. Her body slid toward a deep ravine. She reached for a root. Her fingers barely caught it. Help! The loose soil continued falling beneath her. Lyra looked down. The ravine was several meters deep. Her heart raced. She tried pulling herself upward, but a root began to tear from the ground. Please! Suddenly, something grabbed her. Cloak dot shadow dot. The enormous wolf had seized the fabric between his teeth. He pulled. Lyra felt herself moving upward. Storm grabbed the back of her coat. Together, the wolves dragged her away from the edge. Lyra collapsed onto solid ground. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe. Then she looked at the wolves. You saved me. Shadow released her cloak. Lyra laughed weakly. You keep doing that. The wolf simply stared at her. She reached out and touched his head. Thank you. For a moment, the forest was completely silent. Then Ash turned toward the darkness. His ears lifted. Lyra followed his gaze. What now? The wolves began moving again. This time, they didn't stop. Lyra followed them through a narrow valley until they reached a massive stone formation. The stones were ancient, covered in moss, carved with symbols. Lyra stepped closer. Her eyes widened. The symbol carved into the larger stone was, unmistakable. A crowned wolf surrounded by 3 crescent marks. The royal crest. The same symbol worn by Alpha Kael. Lyra touched it. A strange warmth moved through her palm. She immediately pulled her hand away. What is this place? Shadow walked toward the stone. He pressed his nose against the royal symbol. Then he looked at Lyra. Lyra stared at him. You brought me here because of this. The wolf remained silent. Lyra looked around. The stone formation appeared abandoned, but something about it felt familiar. She had seen the symbol before. On Kael's ceremonial cloak, on the banners inside the Great Hall, on the royal seal. Why would the Alpha's crest be carved into a hidden place inside the Forbidden Forest? Lyra took another step. Then she heard breathing. She froze. Someone was nearby. Hello. Silence. Lyra looked at the wolves. All 3 were staring toward a fallen tree. She slowly approached. A tiny movement came from behind it. Lyra stopped. It's okay. A small figure shifted in the darkness. The boy. Rowan. He tried to crawl backward. Lyra immediately lowered herself to the ground. It's me. Rowan stared at her. You came back. I promised I would. His eyes moved toward the wolves. They told me you would. Lyra frowned. Rowan shrugged. They always know. Lyra sat beside him. She noticed that he was shivering. She removed her cloak and wrapped it around his shoulders. You're freezing. Rowan looked at her. Why are you helping me? Lyra smiled sadly. Because you're alone. Rowan looked down. Everyone leaves. I won't. He looked up. Promise. A promise. For the first time, Rowan smiled. But the moment passed quickly. His expression became frightened again. Did anyone follow you? Lyra's eyes moved toward the trees. I think someone did. Rowan immediately grabbed her hand. We have to hide. Who is following us? I don't know. Rowan, you have to tell me. The boy's lips trembled. They come at night. Who? Men. How many? Sometimes 2, sometimes 4. What do they want? Rowan looked toward the ground. Lyra's heart tightened. Why? They say, I'm dangerous. You're a child. Rowan shook his head. They say my blood is dangerous? Lyra went still. What blood? Rowan touched the pendant around his neck. This. Lyra looked at it carefully. A silver pendant, a royal wolf crest. She recognized it, but she didn't yet understand why. Where did you get that? My mother gave it to me. Where is your mother? Rowan's eyes filled with tears. She died. Lyra gently placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry. She told me never to lose this. Why? She said, one day the right person would recognize it. Lyra stared at the pendant. Did she tell you who? Rowan shook his head. She only said the Alpha would know. Lyra's heart began racing. Which Alpha? Rowan whispered. Kael. Lyra looked toward the wolves. Everything was beginning to connect. The royal symbol, that the Forbidden Forest, the wolves, the child. Kael. But one question remained. Why did Rowan fear the Alpha? Rowan, what happened to you? The boy looked at her. My father was killed. Lyra's breath caught. Who killed him? I don't know. Your mother. She tried to protect me. From whom? Rowan's voice became barely audible. From the people inside the castle. Lyra's eyes widened. The castle. Rohan nodded. They told me the Alpha wanted me dead. Lyra shook her head. No, you don't know him. I know enough. Rowan looked confused. Lyra remembered Kael. Cold, proud, distant, but she couldn't imagine him ordering the death of a child. He may be many things, Lyra whispered, but I don't believe he's a murderer. Suddenly a branch snapped. The wolves turned instantly. Shadow growled. Storm moved beside Rowan. Ash stood in front of Lyra. Someone was coming. Lyra quickly pulled Rowan behind the stone. Stay here, but don't move. She stood. The wolves positioned themselves around her. Footsteps grew louder. 1, 2, 3. Then a voice came from the darkness. Lyra, her blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Alpha Kael. He stepped into the clearing. His dark cloak was covered with rain. His eyes immediately found Lyra. Then Rowan. For one long moment, nobody moved. Kael's gaze dropped to the pendant around the child's neck. His entire expression changed. The color drained from his face. He whispered, "That pendant." Lyra stared at him. "You know it." Kael didn't answer. He stepped forward. Rowan immediately backed away. "Stay away." Kael stopped. The fear in the child's voice seemed to strike him. He looked at Lyra. "Who is he?" Lyra stood between them. "I don't know everything yet." Kael's voice became tense. "Where did you find him?" "The wolves brought me here." Kael looked at the three guardians, then back at Rowan. His eyes remained fixed on the pendant. "That belonged to my brother." Lyra's heart stopped. "Your brother?" Kael slowly nodded. "My younger brother." The forest seemed to go silent. Kael looked at Rowan again. For the first time, Lyra saw something in the alpha's eyes she had never seen before. Fear. Fear. Not anger. Not authority. Fear. Kael whispered, "My brother died 20 years ago." Rowan stared at him. Lyra looked between them. Then she noticed something. The child's eyes, the shape of his face. The same dark eyes as Kael, the same sharp brow, the same unmistakable royal features. Lyra's heartbeat accelerated. Kael. He didn't respond. His gaze remained on Rowan. Then a distant howl echoed through the forest. The wolves suddenly turned toward the direction Lyra had come from. Kael's expression hardened. Someone else was approaching. He stepped closer to Lyra. "Take the child and stay behind me." Lyra looked at him. "You're giving me orders again." Kael's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time. It never is." Their eyes locked. For a moment, the years between them disappeared. Then another sound came from the darkness. Metal. Weapons. Kael immediately drew his sword. The wolves growled. Lyra pulled Rowan closer. Kael whispered, "We're surrounded." Lyra's part dropped. They had been followed, and whoever was coming through the trees wasn't there to arrest Lyra. They were there for Rowan. Shadow stepped forward. His eyes glowed beneath the moonlight. 3 black wolves, 1 hidden child, 1 rejected Omega, and an Alpha who was finally beginning to realize that the greatest secret of his life had been alive all along. Then a voice came from the darkness. "Take the boy." Kael raised his sword. Lyra heightened her grip on Rowan. And the 3 ancient wolves prepared to attack. The command echoed through the forest. "Take the boy." Lyra felt Rowan's fingers tighten around hers. He was trembling. Kael stood between them and the darkness, his sword raised. The 3 black wolves spread out around the clearing. Shadow to the left, Storm to the right. Ash directly behind Lyra and Rowan. They were no longer simply watching. They were preparing to fight. A figure stepped between the trees, then another, then another. 4 armed men emerged from the darkness. Their faces were hidden beneath dark hoods. Kael's voice became cold. "Who sent you?" No one answered. One of the men pointed toward. "Rowan, give us the child." Kael tightened his grip on his sword. "You entered Frostfang territory without permission." The man laughed. "We didn't come for permission," he looked at Lyra. "We came for the air." Lyra's heart stopped. "The air." She looked down at Rowan. The boy's face had gone pale. Kael's eyes narrowed. "What did you call him?" The man realized his mistake, but it was too late. Kael stepped forward. "Do you know who he is?" The men raised their weapons. "Kill anyone who interferes." The first attacker charged. Kael moved instantly. Steel struck steel. The sound echoed through the trees. Lyra pulled Rowan backward. "Stay behind me. I can't fight." "You don't have to." A second attacker rushed toward them. Before he could reach Lyra, Shadow slammed into him. The man flew across the clearing. He struck a tree and collapsed. Lyra stared. Shadow stood over him, growling. The remaining men hesitated. Then, Storm attacked. The forest exploded into chaos. Kael fought with terrifying precision. Every movement was controlled. Every strike forced the attackers backward, but there were too many. One man slipped past Kael. He ran toward Rowan. Lyra stepped in front of the child. No. The attacker raised his blade. Lyra grabbed a fallen branch. She struck his wrist. The sword fell. He reached for her. Lyra screamed. Ash lunged the wolf, knocked the man to the ground. Lyra pulled Rowan away. Run. They moved toward the stone formation, but Rowan stumbled. Lyra caught him. Are you hurt? No. Then keep moving. They hid behind the ancient stones. Lyra could still hear fighting. Then silence. She waited 1 second. 2. 3. Kael single quotes echoed through the clearing. Tova. Lyra slowly looked out. The attackers were gone. 2 were unconscious. The others had fled. Kael stood in the center of the clearing. Blood covered his sleeve. Lyra stepped toward him. You're hurt. He looked at the wound. It's nothing. Sit down. Kael stared at her. Lyra, sit. Something in her voice made him obey. He lowered himself against the stone. Lyra opened her small medical pouch. She cleaned the wound. Kael watched her silently. You always do this. Lyra looked at him. Do what? Help people who don't deserve it. She paused. You're the alpha. That doesn't answer my question. Lyra wrapped the bandage. I help people because they're hurt. Kael looked away. And because you're still the same. Lyra frowned. What does that mean? You haven't changed. She gave a bitter smile. I changed a long time ago. Kael looked at her. You just didn't notice. He had no answer. Behind them, Rowan remained hidden. Kael noticed. His expression softened. Can I speak to him? Lyra looked toward Rowan. The boy shook his head. Kael didn't move closer. It's okay. He lowered his sword. I won't hurt you. Rowan slowly stepped out. His eyes remained fixed on Kael. Kael looked at him, then at the pendant. Where did you get that? My mother. What was her name? Rowan hesitated. Amara. Kael's face went completely still. Lyra noticed. You know her. Kael's voice was barely audible. She was my brother's mate. Rowan looked at him. My father's name was Adrian. Kael closed his eyes. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Then he whispered, Adrian. It was as if the name had opened a wound that had never healed. Lyra watched him carefully. Kael looked at Rowan again. Your father had a scar on his left hand. Rowan nodded. He did. He hated thunderstorms. Rowan's eyes widened. He did. He used to hide sweets beneath the dining table when he was young. A faint smile appeared on Kael's face. Who was always afraid our mother would catch him. Rowan stared. You knew him. Kael nodded. He was my brother. Rowan slowly approached. Did he die? Kael looked down. We were told he did. Rowan's eyes filled with tears. My mother said people lied. Kael's jaw tightened. Your mother was right. Lyra felt a chill. What happened? Kael stood. He looked toward the forest. 20 years ago, my brother was supposed to become the next ruler after me. Then what happened? He and Amara discovered something. What? Kael hesitated. Someone was poisoning members of the royal family. Lyra's eyes widened. Who? We never found out. Kael's voice became darker. One night, Adrian and Amara disappeared. The council said they were killed. Kael nodded. We searched for their bodies. Did you find them? No. Lyra looked at Rowan. So everyone believed they were dead. Yes, but Rowan survived. Kael stared at the boy. Somebody hid him. Rowan spoke quietly. My mother told me there was someone inside the castle who wanted us dead. Kael's expression changed. Who? I don't know. Did she ever mention a name? Rowan shook his head. She only said we couldn't trust the Luna. The forest became silent. Lyra looked at Kael. Kael's eyes hardened. Why would he say that? Rowan lowered his head. Because my mother was afraid of her. Kael didn't speak. Lyra remembered Celine's reaction when she mentioned the forest. The fear, the anger, the way she had tried to stop Lyra from leaving. Everything suddenly felt connected. Kael crouched in front of Rowan. Listen to me. Rowan looked at him. I don't know who told you that I wanted you dead. Kael's voice softened. But I never did. Rowan remained silent. Kael continued. I didn't know you were alive. A tear rolled down Rowan's cheek. You really didn't. No. Then why didn't you find me? Kael looked away. Because I didn't know where to look. The boy stared at him. Then he slowly reached for Kael's hand. Kael froze. He hadn't expected it. Rowan whispered. My father told me you were strong. Kael swallowed. I wasn't strong enough to protect him. Lyra watched them. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the alpha, a brother, who had spent decades believing he had failed his family. The shadow suddenly growled. Everyone turned. The wolf was staring at the ground. Lyra approached. What is it? Shadow scratched at the earth. Lyra knelt. Something metallic appeared beneath the soil. She pulled it. Free. An old silver clasp. It carried the royal crest. Kael took it from her. His face changed. This belonged to Amara. Lyra stared. How do you know? I gave it to her. Kael turned the clasp over. There was a tiny engraving on the back, a date, and beneath it, 3 words. Trust the Guardians. Lyra looked at the 3 wolves. The wolves stood perfectly still. Kael whispered. They were protecting Rowan. Lyra nodded. For years Kael looked at her, and they chose you. Lyra didn't understand. Why me? Kael had no answer. But Rowan did. My mother said the Guardians would only trust someone with a pure heart. Lyra looked at the boy. Your mother knew about them. Rowan nodded. She said they were older than the kingdom. Kael stared at the wolves. They aren't just legends. No, Lyra whispered. They're guardians. A distant howl echoed through the mountains. All 3 wolves raised their heads. Then Shadow looked toward the direction of the pack. Kael's expression hardened. We need to leave. Lyra nodded. But where? Kael looked at Rowan. Somewhere Celine can't reach him. Lyra immediately understood. My cabin. Kael looked at her. Your cabin is the first place they'll search. Then where? Lyra remembered something. An abandoned healer's hut deeper in the forest. No one uses the old healer's shelter. Kael nodded. Take Rowan there. Lyra frowned. What about you? I'll handle the pack. You can't go back alone. Kael looked at her. I am the alpha. Lyra shook her head. That doesn't make you invincible. For a moment, they stared at each other. Something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but something new. Respect, trust, the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. Kael finally said, Stay with Rowan. Lyra nodded. Then he looked toward the 3 wolves. Protect them. Shadow stepped forward. The wolf stared into Kael's eyes, then lowered his head. Kael looked surprised. Lyra whispered, I think he understands. Kael looked at her. Maybe he understands more than we do. Lyra smiled faintly. Then they separated. Lyra took Rowan toward the hidden healer shelter. Kael returned toward the pack, but neither of them knew what waited for them, because inside the Frostfang settlement, Luna Celine had already received the news. The boy had been found. The Guardians had returned. And Lyra knew too much. Celine stood before the dark window. A servant waited behind her. Did they find the child? Yes. Celine closed her eyes. Does Kael know? Yes. Her hand tightened around the edge of the table. Then, everything changes. The servant looked nervous. What should we do? Celine turned. Her expression was cold. Remove the child. And Lyra. Celine smiled. Make the pack believe she kidnapped him. The servant bowed. Celine looked toward the forest. She had spent 20 years burying the truth. She wasn't going to let one rejected Omega uncover it in a single night. But what Celine didn't know, was that Kael had already begun to question everything, and for the first time in 20 years, the truth was no longer buried, was walking back toward the Frostfang Pack, in the form of a frightened little boy. 3 ancient wolves, and the woman everyone had once called worthless. The night had barely settled over Frostfang territory when Luna Celine made her move. Inside the main hall, every candle burned low. The pack believed the danger had passed. They were wrong. Celine stood before the council table, staring at a map of the territory. Her finger rested on the eastern forest. The boy is alive, she said. No one answered. She looked toward the guards. And Lyra knows. One of the elders swallowed. If the Alpha discovers the truth, he already knows. The room fell silent. Selena's expression hardened. Then we have no more time. For 20 years, she had protected her secret. She had manipulated the council. She had controlled the story of Adrian's death. She had made sure Rowan disappeared. And she had watched Kael become colder with every passing year. But now everything was collapsing because 3 ancient guardians had returned, and they had chosen the one person Selene had never considered dangerous. Lyra. Selene turned toward. The guards find her and the child. Bring him back alive. The guard hesitated. And if Lyra refuses, Selena's eyes became cold. Then make sure she never returns. Far from the settlement, Lyra was helping Rowan walk through the forest. The old healer's shelter was only a short distance away, but Rowan was exhausted. Lyra crouched beside him. Can you keep going? He nodded. I can. You don't have to pretend to be brave. I want to be brave. Lyra smiled. You already are. Rowan looked at her. Were you brave when they rejected you? Lyra froze. How do you know? My mother told me about you. Lyra's eyes widened. Your mother knew me. Rowan nodded. She said there was an Amiga in the pack who had a kind heart. Lyra looked away. I don't think many people would describe me that way. She did. Those simple words touched something inside Lyra. For years, she had wondered whether anyone had ever truly seen her. Perhaps someone had. Someone who was no longer alive. The 3 wolves moved around them as they continued. Then shadows suddenly stopped. Lyra knew that look. Someone is coming. Rowan grabbed her hand. Are they the men? I don't know. Lyra looked around. Stay behind me. The sound of footsteps grew louder, then a voice called through the trees. Lyra. She recognized it. A pack guard. Lyra's expression hardened. Don't answer. The guard stepped into view. 2 more followed. Their weapons were drawn. Lyra, come back to the settlement. She shook her head. No. The guard frowned. You've been ordered to return, Bahum. He hesitated. Selene. Lyra's stomach tightened. Why? The guard looked toward Rowan. We need the child. Rowan stepped backward. Lyra immediately stood in front of him. You're not taking him. The guards raised their weapons. Don't make this difficult. Lyra's voice became firm. You're the ones making it difficult. One of the guards stepped forward. You have no authority here. Lyra looked at the 3 wolves, then